natural thing for kids is, where's the hot shower? It's different. It's bad.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
That's a natural like thought that just jumps in. Different equals bad. Because every time I come into different, I don't like it. And it's based on experience, really.
Mm-hmm.
It's not based on information.
Yes. Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
So then with people, these stereotypes, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we walk in that sympathy towards them, compassion.
And humility, because you can still learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
Even if what's the point of observation is something bad,
Mm-hmm.
which might be, yeah. I'm just saying, even from a mistake,
Right.
you can learn.
Right.
And you're not perfect. Even if you're doing better at that area, you can still improve.
Right.
Just by looking at something that's not ideal.
Even in the last week, my American Californian daughter, you know, who I could never imagine adjusting to Mexican comforts. I don't know, in certain ways, depends on which ones they are. She told me she enjoyed taking a cold shower
Mm-hmm.
because the thing for the water heater went out, and so it just wasn't turning on.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, I took a cold shower and I liked it. And she was surprised too, you know. So I'm like, good, you know, that's awesome. That's actually changing her mind.
Yeah.
This difference that she's experienced isn't bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's just different. And if you see the value of it, now, you might say in the middle of winter that a cold shower is just not good, you know.
I would agree.
I
would agree
with that. But here we are in the middle of the heat, and she's like, actually, I kind of liked it. I don't need to always have. You know, I think we tend to get attached to things that way.
Yeah.
I must always have my hot shower.
We're rigid. We like patterns. We like.
Yeah.
We create culture. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's good.
Yeah.
But we can't be so rigid that.
Yeah.
You get the point.
Yeah. And it goes to so many little things that we do in our lives. What we eat, how we handle our daily life. It's those little regular things, and that when one of them's taken away, we get shook all of a sudden. You know, you don't have your rice, or you don't have your tortilla, or you don't have your whatever thing is normal for you, right?
Yeah.
And so it sort of equals bad.
Yeah.
But if you just realize it's different, and that other flavors, other things, it took me a while to get used to a cold shower.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I learned how to do it. You got to take your shower differently, you know, and things. And then I was refreshed instead of heated up. But whatever. But then it does equal that really important difference. And what's interesting is it makes me, even in those little things, you know, faithful in the little things. I always come when Jesus says that, and I think, how little, you know, just how little are the little things that are important. Be faithful in the little things. And I realize, like, in these moments, it does come down to your shower, your air conditioning, the other thing she said, she was like, you know, we went to this person's house the other day, and I realized I wouldn't mind living in one of those houses. You know, where and the idea is that, you know, the walls aren't fully painted, the tile floor is not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're kind of just used to that being a normal thing as Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And God blessed us with an apartment here that's like that. But she suddenly realized, like, I actually think that living there would give me freedoms that I can't have because I needed to have my comforts before.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so she's growing in that. She's like, you know, I realize, like, it's not bad, that difference that's over there. It's actually could be even better than what I had before. And her growth in that is really cool to see. But I think another element, maybe this goes back to you growing up as a pastor's kid.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up as an elder's kid, you know. My dad was not a pastor, but he studied to be a pastor in California,
Mm-hmm.
and he is an elder in the church, and so
Mm-hmm.
people treated me like I was a pastor's kid. Plus, my mom
Okay.
was a principal, so they still called me a PK.
How incredible that at one point you were thinking that something was bad, and at a different point after the learning experience, you don't think that's not bad,
Yeah,
but even that it was good for you.
yeah.
That's crazy. Like, that's growth.
It's real growth and it's real character. What I noticed though was that it was so important that we didn't push her into that and force that decision, because I can see in each kid differently how quickly that promotes rebellion. Because they are fixed and they have grown up a certain way. They're fixed to their attitudes. They're like stuck in that, and they didn't know that life could be lived a different way and be enjoyable at the same time. You know, but spending time and not being thrown into the deep end, as it were, gave them those chances to compare the two and to not just experience it, but to then see it and maybe even desire it instead of just being okay with it. And I think that's where a lot of pastors' kids, missionary kids, like I've said at church a number of times, where the majority don't become pastors and don't become missionaries.
That's crazy, man.
They don't want that life.
That's crazy. That's crazy to me.
Like, because they get thrown into it without a choice and are never given the opportunity to choose for themselves. Do I want this? I know I have to because my parents are providing a house and food, but, you know.
The thing that surprised me the first time you mentioned it, it was in the context, I don't know what you were teaching on, or what passage, but I just remember that it was in the context of kids not wanting to have anything with it. And that shocked me because I see the blessing, like, I see the blessing of, you know, it happens with everything. For example, it's known that most of the top athletes have a lineage.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
and their parents were top athletes too, or
Right.
or they were into sports. They coached their kids. Like, in that way, if your dad is in ministry, or even, we tend to think that's a better, Christian.
Right.
But if your dad's just a solid Christian, like, what a blessing, and how advantageous that you grew well.
Yeah.
But what I was thinking when you were mentioning that the first time, it's like how crazy that most of the Christianese culture with Christian families, but sadly it's more religious and, like you said, pushing and forcing and stuff. And you also mentioned a little bit of hypocrisy and stuff. Sad that happens at families. Even sadder that it happens with pastors. Like, I think if your dad's a pastor, by the time you're growing up and thinking about moving out of the house and just being your own family or whatever, you should be really excited about Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, your dad should make you excited about Jesus.
Yeah.
How sad it is that, I don't know, someone must have done a study or survey.
Yeah.
How many pastor kids turn back on church?
Yeah.
But
one of the famous ones was Franklin Graham. You know, he was the problem child for Billy Graham.
And I understand that even if dads do their job, there's always a kid who turns back, right? But I'm talking about a different thing. That
what's good is that, you know, he had a dad that, well, his dad wasn't around a lot.
Mhm.
You know, his dad was traveling,
Oh, okay.
right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Doing ministry, and that often hurts instead of helps. You know, there's human error in a lot of things, but he did have a dad that stayed solid, and so when he came to his bottom, Franklin Graham, he turned back to the Lord.
Yeah.
And now he's doing what his dad used to do. You know,
Cool.
but a little more on he's much more focused on humanitarian stuff rather than purely preaching. You know.
Mhm.
But you see that, and you see kind of those tendencies of rebellion, you know. But yeah, what is the example? And what, even with Billy Graham, if you think of that, like, okay, so the tradition, the culture was, if you're going to be an evangelist, you know, you go preach, and you spend all your time doing it. What if the culture allowed children to travel with him? You know, what if the situation, the Christian circle encouraged time with family, you know, instead of pushing, hey, just go for it, you know, go sacrifice everything, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's something,
You know,
that you have to consider, right?
Right. Could it have been different? You know, what are there different possible outcomes? You know?
Yeah.
Sure, and but yet we have what we have, and so, you know, I just like to say, what if we thought biblically about this, you know, and instead of just saying, well, it's my culture, or it's how Christians do things, because when we say that, I think when we say how Christians do things, we're actually implying a Christian culture, you know, instead of an American or a Mexican or whatever other culture, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We're implying culture, tradition, instead of just biblical. You know, do you have a biblical reason behind what you're doing? Anyway.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot, because, yeah, there's the Mexican way, or there's
Mm-hmm.
this way, and we all think it's the best way.
Right.